Chapter 46 Journey's End. Inez was lying flat on her back in a field of mud, the wind howling above her. The only thing she could feel was her own heartbeat. Each pulse of blood sent waves of pain across her body. It was overwhelming. She could sense what was happening around her, but not really make sense of it all. Inez was very nearly blind and deaf. Exhausted and broken, Inez knew she was finished. She could not form any coherent thoughts, aside from the realization that she was not going to escape death a second time. Somewhere above her, she could hear voices. "Get behind me!" Setla shouted. Then there was a series of gunshots. The sound of each blast hurt so much, Inez felt as though her eardrums would burst. "Nezi's down!" called out another voice. "Come on, we've got to help!" Inez recognized the voice. It was David Sepulveda. She dared to let a little hope work its way into her soul. She turned her head to the left, something that was very painful to do, and opened her eyes. A horrible scene met her gaze. Setla was hunched over on his hands and knees, leaking blood from half a dozen punctures in his armor. The 5 remaining Stormbreakers were huddled behind him, shielding themselves from Cassandra. The 11-year-old girl was walking backwards slowly, following Akira and pointing a laser pistol at the Stormbreakers. Further away, several members of the rescue team broke from cover and started racing toward Akira. David, Lawrence, and Emma were all visibly wounded, but they charged headlong across the field, closing the distance toward Akira. Cassandra spun on her heels and fired the laser pistol wildly in their direction. All 3 fighters dove for what little cover there was in the open marsh. Inez felt a torrent of emotions. She could not understand why Cassandra had suddenly turned hostile like this. She wanted to scream, "Why?" But her answer came quickly. A noise from somewhere behind Inez caught her attention. Out of the corner of her eye, Inez saw Akira quickly turn around and point at something. Cassandra mimicked Akira's movement, swiveling on the spot to fire at someone just out of Inez's sight. Finally, Inez got to see her sister's face. Cassandra looked different. Her eyes were clouded over and glassy, as though she were already dead. The young girl shuffled around the battlefield like a zombie, not even bothering to look down the sights of her weapon, almost as though someone was aiming the pistol for her. Cassandra was under mind control. The realization washed over Inez, dampening the intense pain she felt. Before the fight began, Cassandra was afraid of dying, of being hurt and killed. But this was infinitely worse. Akira was, by means of telepathy, forcing Cassandra to fight against her friends. Inez and Setla were both wounded, and given time, others could be hurt as well. Inez was not the only person to realize this. David Sepulveda yelled out, "Don't shoot the kid! She's bewitched! Go for the paradox!" David, Emma, and Lawrence were making another attempt to reach Akira. Moving swiftly, they bounded out of cover. Akira directed Cassandra to shoot at the incoming rescuers. All the while, the paradox was still backing away, retreating toward the tree line where Rafi Bakir and his space rangers were laying down cover fire for her. "I've got to get up," Inez told herself. She lifted her arms, trying to clamber back to her feet. Waves of mind-numbing pain rippled out from 2 points on her body, her upper right arm and the right side of her ribcage. Fighting against the ache of 2 gunshot wounds, Inez sat up and found the Shadowkeeper beside her. "Hold on, Inez! I'm coming to you!" David yelled. "Richtofen, cover me!" Emma threw herself behind the wrecked tail fin of the Sky Ranger and fired her plasma rifle at the false Jericho. Akira turned and raised a telekinetic shield between herself and the attacker. Plasma bolts deflected and flew in random directions, forcing many of the fighters to duck for cover again. At that moment, David sprang out of cover and started running toward Inez. "Sniper!" Quarter screamed. Too late. There was a loud crack, a flash of red light, and then a crimson bolt struck David squarely in the center of the forehead, passing through his skull and continuing on its grim journey. David dropped his weapon and his eyes widened for a moment before he fell forward into the mud. Varian, Quarter, and Kingi all turned to open fire on the Space Rangers, while Maui and Nainu ran to the spot where David fell. Again, Akira directed Cassandra to attack the Stormbreakers. This time, however, Cassandra hesitated a moment before complying. She was resisting. Seeing her sister was still in there somewhere, Inez forced herself back to her feet. It did not matter if she lived or died. The only thing Inez cared about now was getting to Cassandra and separating her from the paradox. Inez staggered forward before breaking into the fastest pace she could, her feet slipping in the mud. "Nezzy's up!" Nainu cheered. "She's not dead!" Inez swore. The surprise was spoiled. The false Jericho rounded on her, preparing to fight. But in that moment, her concentration finally broke. It all happened in about 3 seconds. First, there was a flash of green light, brighter than the sun. Inez jammed her eyes shut, as did everyone else. Next, Inez picked up on the sound of rushing water. Or was it air? Something was racing very quickly to be somewhere else, that was certain. Finally, every person in the immediate area, including Inez, was filled with an overwhelming sense of impending doom. This time, Inez knew what had happened. She knew what was coming and leapt out of the way, crashing painfully to the ground as the Emerald Avatar made itself known. A translucent green entity, shaped vaguely like a human woman, stood in the place where Cassandra had been moments ago. She flickered and wavered as though constantly phasing into and out of reality. Instead of eyes, the Emerald Avatar had 2 points of vivid starlight set in its otherwise blank face, each as bright as the sun, forcing Inez to look away. Inez knew the Emerald Avatar had a habit of attacking everyone around it indiscriminately. She needed to get clear and leave her mother as the only viable target. But just as Inez scrambled to her feet and prepared to run, a voice spoke, projecting itself into her mind telepathically. "We'll take her together." Inez turned back. She saw the Emerald Avatar briefly nod its head before turning to launch itself at Akira. In a moment, Inez understood. Cassandra was lucid. She was in control. "Varian, get those Rangers off our back!" Inez raised her voice. "We're taking the paradox!" Inez followed her sister into the fight, ducking under a bolt from Rafi's laser sniper rifle as she went. Behind her, Setla slumped forward and collapsed, leaving the 5 remaining Stormbreakers without cover. In a desperate final action, Varian led his team in a charge against Rafi and his Space Rangers. Emma and Lawrence joined them. Inez and the Emerald Avatar reached the false Jericho in seconds. Akira pointed one hand at the ground and lifted it, conjuring a shimmering psionic construct. An obelisk materialized in front of Inez, blocking her way. Green soulfire erupted in the empty space between Akira and the Emerald Avatar as they met. Akira dodged around the Avatar's first strike and followed up with one of her own. She conjured a shimmering ball of green light and hurled it toward the Emerald Avatar. Meanwhile, Inez had gotten around the obelisk. Her body strained and groaned as though her bones would simply fall apart, but Inez pressed through the pain and got behind her mother. She raised the Shadowkeeper, aiming at what appeared to be the false Jericho's hooded cloak, but was really the backside of the Prometheus device, hidden beneath a hologram. "Director! Behind you!" Rafi shouted from the tree line. Akira whirled around to face Inez, who swore and tried to dodge, but it was too late. A telekinetic pulse hit Inez like a speeding car, throwing her painfully to one side. Rafi ducked behind a fallen timber as Gauss slugs sailed over his head. "This site's getting hot," Rafi called to his men. "Get ready to break cover and move!" No reply came. Instead, a high-pitched scream sounded to Rafi's right. He looked around just in time to see Varian break into the tree line, gunning down the Space Ranger. Rafi leapt up and drew his Gauss pistol. Varian spotted him and did the same. Both men raised their weapons and fired almost simultaneously. Varian gasped, stumbled, and fell over backwards, crashing into a bush and out of sight. Rafi took a step forward, firing 2 more rounds into the place where Varian had fallen. The sound of his own gunshots drowned out the noise of 2 more Stormbreakers thundering through the undergrowth. In less than a moment, Quarter and Kingi ambushed Rafi, forcing him out of the woodline entirely. Caught out of position and unable to use his laser sniper rifle, Rafi had no choice but to retreat, running toward Akira's position. Inez struggled to stand up. This time, she knew several of her bones were broken. It hurt to breathe, and a sharp pain radiated from her right hip. Her right arm hung useless at her side, so she clutched the Shadow Keeper in her left. Inez was painfully aware of the fact that with only one working hand, she would not be able to reload her weapon. In front of her, the Emerald Avatar and the False Jericho were still fighting, trading psionic attacks back and forth. A short distance away, Inez could see Quarter and Kingi grappling with Rafi in a bloody melee. Akira spotted Inez and reacted. A jet of green light shot through the air and struck the body of David Sepulveda. For a moment, Inez could have sworn she saw the body move. Then, something strange separated itself from David. A spectral entity seemed to emerge from within David's body, head and torso first. A moment later, a dark green creature, shaped like a human, was standing beside David's remains. Inez had read about spectral ghosts when she was a child, but no amount of reading or television could prepare her for the real thing. The ghost seemed to constantly shift in color, from green to blue and yellow, and back again. It was shaped exactly like Akira, but had none of her features. The spectral ghost pointed one finger at Inez. It was about to attack. Inez was not sure why, but after everything that had happened in the past 48 hours, she genuinely could not see this thing as a threat. She knew right away that her mother created this creature just to keep Inez busy while she fought the Emerald Avatar. "You're not even real," Inez said to the spectral ghost. "You can't hurt me, can you?" A bolt of lightning shot away from the ghost and hit Inez in the chest, just over her heart. If there was any pain, Inez did not notice. She turned away from the ghost and started hobbling toward Akira once more. The spectral ghost gave chase, striking Inez with 2 more psionic volts, both of which she ignored. As she moved to rejoin the fight, Inez noticed something. There was a ring of people surrounding the scene of the Sky Ranger crash. Far more people than there should have been. She could see members of the rescue party, Ted Navarro, Munkustrap, Sergeant Rella, and Jay. She also spotted several UN Space Rangers, their weapons pointing harmlessly at the ground. Finally, there were about 400 new soldiers on the scene. Partogans, Lavakians, Amadi, Vanians, Tydan, Ozcox, Vagar, Skildari, Blord, Kelazon, Praku, Vor, Tobari, and Kelt. Nobody was fighting. The guns were silent. Many of the GDF soldiers were attempting to triage the wounded. Inez could see Varian, Setla, Irabik, and Emmanuel being treated by medics. Even further away, she could see a Partogan marine frigate coming into land near the bunker where the alien children were hidden. Aside from the two skirmishes playing out in the center of the ring, the battle was over. In front of Inez, the Emerald Avatar and False Jericho were locked in combat. Telekinetic blasts went off between them like artillery strikes, kicking up dirt and mud. Quarter, Kingi, and Maui were taking on Rafi together. His power armor made him a hard target and a dangerous fighter. As Inez approached, Rafi slugged Quarter in the face, grabbed her by the throat, and threw her onto the ground. As she fell, Quarter hit Maui as well, knocking him down. Inez changed course, limping towards Rafi, but it was not necessary. Kingi gripped his own rifle by the barrel and swung it, striking Rafi's outstretched arm. No power armor could save him from the sheer force of Kingi's strike, and Rafi screamed as his arm broke. Rafi fell to his knees, yelling in agony. Kingi adjusted his footing and swung his rifle again, striking Rafi's head and putting an end to the Space Ranger. Akira saw the demise of her final supporter and screamed. She lashed out at the Emerald Avatar, causing it to stagger under the weight of unseen force. Then Akira looked around, observing the gathering crowd for the first time. "Mother!" Inez shouted. "It's all over! Your dream is dead!" The False Jericho turned to sneer at Inez. The hologram flickered, revealing the true face of Akira Robinson for just a moment. Inez knew she would not be able to stand up much longer. It was sheer willpower keeping her going at this point. The will to save Cassandra, to save her friends, and put an end to all of this. "Nothing is over," Akira replied. "You're wrong." "How would you know?" Inez retorted, staggering closer still. She was about 50 feet away from her mother now. "Because so many people adopted my dream. It's become ingrained in human culture now," Akira replied. "Even if you destroyed the prophets and scattered their ashes across the galaxy, someone will reproduce them and use them to lead humanity to its rightful destiny." Green soulfire appeared in Akira's hands, enveloping her arms. Inez drew closer, as did the Emerald Avatar. Out of the corner of her eye, Inez spotted Nainu slinking through the mud on her right. "In the next century, and those that follow, humankind will only continue to advance and grow stronger," Akira said. "The ethereal saw our potential over 100 years ago, and look how far we've come as a species since then. The galaxy will be helpless against our kind. We can ensure Earth is never again threatened by dominating the cosmos." Inez was losing physical strength. She was now dragging her right leg behind her, and it hurt to hold the Shadow Keeper, but she kept her wits about her as she drew nearer still. "That might be true," Inez said, "but you forget. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders. How many friends and allies have we made in the past century? How many of them are here now, not as conquerors, but as rescuers and liberators? Humanity is not in danger now, and we gain nothing by making enemies of the galaxy, especially the friends who fought and bled beside us." Inez reached her mother. The Emerald Avatar and Nainu stood alongside her. "Empires aren't built by making alliances," Akira countered. "If we don't go strong and powerful, humanity will die out." Inez raised her Shadow Keeper, pointing the weapon directly between Akira's eyes. "The kind of power you're talking about is temporary, easily undermined, and based in a kind of evil only some people would go along with," Inez seethed. "Look around! How many humans saw what you were doing and decided to join the aliens against you? We don't want to hate our neighbors. We don't want to wake up each day thinking about how to dominate and conquer and oppress. We just want to go home, live out our lives, and be with our friends and family." Akira brought her hands together, psionic energy building up between her palms. "You are so naive, Nezzy," Akira hissed. "Shoot me and you'll set humanity back 50 years, but you won't stop it." Inez, Nainu, Akira, and the Emerald Avatar all moved at once. Nainu fired his laser pistol at Akira. She deflected the laser bolt and sent it off at an angle. The Emerald Avatar fired a beam of light from its eyes, setting the right-hand gauntlet of Akira's Promethea device on fire. At the same moment, the deflected laser bolt struck the Emerald Avatar. The psionic creature fell backwards, and the transformation reversed. Cassandra collapsed into the mud, clutching at her stomach and wailing in pain. Inez saw this and flinched, holding still for a moment too long. A bolt of lightning jumped from Akira's hand and hit her squarely in the head. Inez fell backwards and hit the ground so hard that her hip broke a second time. Inez screamed from the agony until her throat hurt. Somewhere on her right, Nainu recovered. He took aim again and fired his laser pistol as fast as he could pull the trigger. Akira deflected several bolts, but her Prometheus device was damaged. 2 shots got past her defenses. The first one impacted the side of the Prometheus device, shutting it down for good. As the hologram started to fail, the second laser bolt hit Akira in the stomach, roughly around the same point where Cassandra had just been shot. The hologram finally died away, leaving the true Akira Robinson doubled up, clutching at the bloody wound in her gut. She snarled and kicked Nainu as hard as she could. The little lizard flew 10 feet away and landed in the mud. He did not move. Several members of the watching crowd had seen enough. Gunfire sounded as a number of soldiers opened fire on Akira. She raised her hand to deflect the blow, but the Prometheus device was no longer working. Without a psionic amplifier, Akira's powers were drastically reduced. Gauss rounds and plasma bolts hit the Sky Ranger wreckage behind Akira. She ducked, and in that moment, Inez seized her final opportunity. Unable to walk, Inez kicked out with her left leg and found her mother. Akira lost balance and fell to the ground. Screaming from the pain of doing so, Inez tried to roll over into a position where she could shoot Akira. Realizing what was about to happen, Akira jabbed with one hand, punching Inez in the face. Akira grabbed Inez's left arm and pinned it, trapping the Shadow Keeper. Desperately, both women wrestled and fought for control of the Shadow Keeper. Inez refused to let go of the handgun, clinging onto it for dear life. Akira turned Inez over, climbed atop her, and wrapped one arm around Inez's throat, pushing her daughter's face into the mud. With the other, she made one final attempt to grab the pistol. Face down in the mud, Inez could see and hear nothing. Both the mud and her mother were suffocating her at the same time. Inez felt her left arm being twisted into a painful position. She would not be able to hold onto the weapon much longer. Desperate and dying, Inez took one final gamble. She let go of the Shadow Keeper. Inez released the handle of the weapon, and it came free into Akira's hands. But at the last second, before the weapon stopped touching Inez's hand, she hooked her index finger around the trigger guard. With all of her remaining strength, Inez violently jerked her whole body. The Shadow Keeper went off with such force that it felt like a small bomb detonated on Inez's back. At once, the force pressing Inez's face into the mud was lifted. Inez was able to raise her head and breathe again. She could just barely hear a rattling sound behind her. All around, soldiers were approaching. A few of them were calling out for medics. A sudden pressure on Inez's back and legs told her that Akira was crawling off her. Slowly, racked by pain, Inez sat up. Akira was hunched over on her knees, both of her hands clutching at a bloody wound on her chest. The Shadow Keeper was half submerged in a muddy puddle on the ground, and Akira was struggling to breathe. She looked up, taking in the scene around her. All 3 of the Prophet-class cruisers were down. The GDF had arrived in force, and all of the soldiers loyal to her were dead, dying, or surrendered. The bodies of Rafi Bakir, Sidney Bouclair, and Klaus Eberhard were laid alongside the other Space Rangers, while GDF soldiers triaged the alien children and rescue party. Akira's face was pale. I failed. Akira's voice was weak, breathless. I couldn't build a perfect future. Fail? No, you didn't, Inez replied. Humankind can survive anything the galaxy throws at us now, because we have friends and allies off-world. We're strong because we are not alone, and the future looks bright, brighter than it ever has before. Akira wheezed, attempting to gulp down air, but something seemed to be wrong with her lungs. Finally, a group of GDF medics reached Inez. They started to spray Inez's injuries with a nano medikit, but then turned to one another, asking what should be done with Akira. However, they would not need to answer that question. Akira turned her head to face east. The sunrise filled her vision. Most of the great yellow disk was clear of the horizon, resulting in a genuinely beautiful Christmas morning in the Florida coastline. Ocean waves crashed onto the sandy beach, spraying white foam over the glistening water. Inez looked away from the sunrise at her mother. She saw the sunrise filling Akira's eyes for just a moment. Then, Akira heaved her chest once more, desperately trying to fill her lungs with air, but it was no good. Her face lost all of its color, and the deep blue light in her eyes seemed to dim. Akira Robinson slowly slumped forward, coming to rest on her side. Inez reached out and took her hand. Partogan medics set to work on Inez's many injuries, but she had eyes only for Akira, who was writhing and shaking in the mud, gasping for air, eyes wide. Inez did not move. She watched her mother die. Sometime later, Inez did not know when, someone pulled at her arm. Akira's hand, now ice cold, slipped away. At long last, after a day and a half of desperate fighting and surviving, exhaustion took its toll on Inez. She fell backwards. The world became dark and silent. And then what happened? The Galactic Defense Force took control of the scene. The alien children were taken off-world and are safely aboard a Titani mothership now. I heard the first family reunions have already happened. What about the Space Rangers who sided with the Paradox? Most of them are dead. Those who remain are in UN custody. But, Secretary General Robinson says he's willing to hand them over to the Galactic Council for trial. And what of the former Stormbreakers? Well, Chihiro has reunited with her husband, and she's been making hyperwave calls, trying to gather the entire Robinson family in one spot to figure out who's alive and who's dead. Tsubaki Endo and Jane Kelly are acting as Blake's liaisons to the GDF. Axiom and Dayunda Zeal took command of the force sent from Orlando, the one occupying Canaveral now. Oh, and a bunch of GDF officers got together and declared Kanti Divakar temporary galactic custodian. Divakar? The Vanian? They see her as neutral and unbiased, above petty politics because of her background. The Vanian homeworld was destroyed in the last war, and she spent the past 50 years leading her people in the search for a new planet. I see. Last question. Where are subjects 2 and 3? I left them with a babysitter. The Emerald Institute is interested in those children, Miss Espinosa. I am Cassandra's legal guardian. Depending on how things shake out, I'll be taking Isaac with me too. Inez Espinosa narrowed her eyes at Administrator Varys. In the aftermath of the previous few days, this Tydani man from the Sentry Array had become the new director of the Emerald Institute. He leaned back in his chair and looked out of the window. The two people were in an office building located in the town of Port Canaveral, a few miles south of the battlefield. Out of the window, Varys and Inez could see the remains of an old-world luxury cruise ship. It was rotting in its dry dock, abandoned for the past 80 years. Varys shook his head. There is much rebuilding to be done, he said. Rest assured, the Emerald Institute will extend whatever help is necessary for your family, your planet, and your species. Thank you, Inez finished. She left the building, taking great care to walk slowly and to avoid sudden movements. Only a few days ago, the local gene therapy clinic had repaired her shoulders and ribs. Her hip was repaired too, but the gene therapy workers told Inez that hip repair was just a patch job, and eventually Inez would need to have total hip replacement surgery. She was still very stiff. Thankfully, it was a short walk from the Institute's new field office to her destination. The Port Canaveral Gene Therapy Clinic was built right on the shoreline, so patients could see the ocean whenever they wanted. Inez went from room to room, checking in on every member of her rescue party. Everybody was wounded during the fighting, some narrowly escaping death like Inez. All 29 rescuers had been shot at least once. Others suffered from broken bones, smoke inhalation, plasma burns, and other combat-related injuries. Varian had lost an eye. During the final few moments of the conflict, he just barely managed to dodge a Gauss slug from Rafi Bakir, but the grazing hit still did catastrophic damage. When Inez went to see him, she found the young Stormbreaker sitting up in bed, testing out eye patches and glass eyes. Her father, Emmanuel, woke up to find his right arm amputated at the shoulder. To save him from bleeding out during the battle, Corder and Naveen had placed a tourniquet on his arm. By the time Emmanuel reached the clinic, his limb was beyond saving. He took it in stride, talking to anyone who would listen about his plans for a cybernetic arm. Setla was perhaps the most seriously injured survivor. When the situation took a bad turn, he had allowed his comrades to use his body as a shield. The giant reptilian was shot 15 times with different types of weapons. 5 days after the battle, he was still in surgery. Only one of the 29 rescuers perished. David Sepulveda lost his life at the height of the battle. His body was separated from those of Rafi, Klaus, Polly, Sydney, and Yasin. At Inez's request, David's body would be repatriated to Mexico and buried in his hometown. One rescuer was missing, Irabik. 3 days after Akira's death, several Batera machines stormed onto the beach outside of the clinic. Irabik was out there at the time, testing out her newly repaired wing. The machines pushed past Carfu, seized Irabik roughly, and then dragged her away. The Ozcock senator screamed and protested, and Inez could hear Irabik's demands for release until the moment she was dragged aboard a Batera warship. By the time someone responded to the commotion, the Batera starship was long gone. In fact, they were all gone. As if responding to a signal, every Batera war form and vessel suddenly broke away from the GDF and disappeared into hyperspace. Since then, nobody has seen or heard from either Erebik or those strange machines. There was one person Inez desperately wanted to see, but had not gotten the chance until now. Cassandra was avoiding her. Inez knew why. She had gotten the story from Emmanuel. Cassandra felt terrible about shooting Inez and Setla, and was too ashamed to meet her sister face to face. Today, however, this would be resolved. It was around midday, and the beach was beautiful. A balmy wind kept the atmosphere warm and refreshing, while winter sunlight glinted off the many starships high above. White foamy waves crashed against the beach, while gene therapy staff kept a watchful eye on their patients, many of whom were relaxing on the sand behind the clinic. Inez was here on the beach today for a scheduled meeting. This had been arranged yesterday. When she arrived, Inez found her father having a conversation with several people, a mix of rescuers and clinic staff. "I saw on the news," Emmanuel was saying, "the Galactic Council voted to honor the peace agreement Secretary General Robinson signed with Queen Marka before she died. On top of that, the UN General Assembly and the other galactic powers are going to open negotiations about the reconstruction of all planets that were devastated by this war. I hope they make them focus on Amadeo," Claws of Honeydew sighed. "Those poor birds are still brainwashed by that psionic weapon. They're tripping over one another, desperate to chain themselves to humanity." "I've heard my people have already submitted a petition to the Galactic Council," Setla said. "Our droids are servitors, first and foremost. Even in war, the old mandatory pampering protocol takes precedence. If Amadeo becomes a MyCorp protectorate, their people will be given the proper care and treatment they so desperately need." "If your people have any droids to spare, could you send a few to Earth?" Emmanuel joked. "I know I said I don't mind parting with an arm, but a servitor droid with, what was it, mandatory pampering protocols? That sounds really good right about now. I'll take one for my new house, and one more for the kids living in it." "Kids?" Corder repeated. "What kids?" "That's the reason I wanted to talk to you, Dad." Inez spoke up, announcing her presence. "Did you bring Cassandra?" Emmanuel called her name, and Cassandra came running up from the beach. An exhausted-looking nurse tried to keep pace with her, but fell behind. Once she reached the group, Cassandra's nurse lifted the front of her shirt and reapplied a medical cream to Cassandra's belly. Her midsection was badly burned and scarred, marking the place where she was shot by a laser pistol during the battle. Meanwhile, Cassandra spotted Inez. Her face turned red, and she looked at the ground. Inez looked around and realized the person she was waiting for had not arrived yet. She asked Emmanuel to wait a moment, and then knelt down to Cassandra's level, a movement that was still very painful to do. "Hey, Cass, are you okay?" Inez said. Cassandra sniffled. Then she threw herself at Inez, wrapping her sister in a big hug. "I'm sorry, Nessie," Cassandra sobbed. "She made me do it. She took me over." Inez reached up and patted Cassandra's head, shushing her. "It's okay, Cass. It's okay. I know it's not your fault. I know it wasn't you." Inez and Cassandra held on to one another until the people Inez was expecting finally showed up. A doctor carrying a clipboard joined the group. Another doctor, this one a woman, joined him. His companion was carrying the baby known as Subject 3 in her arms. She used a small, floppy hat to shield the baby from the sunlight. "Are you Inez and Emmanuel Espinosa?" the first doctor asked. "We are," Inez replied. She stood up, making sure to keep a hold of Cassandra's hand. "We finished our evaluation of the boy," the doctor began. "Some of the crew of the starship Confucius referred to him as Isaac, so that's the name we've used. We determined that Isaac is mostly healthy but slightly undernourished. We've given him both a feeding program and a gene therapy treatment to get the little man back to full strength. At your request, Miss Espinosa, we have performed a full genetic tree analysis, comparing him to all data we have on hand. This is the young man's family tree." The doctor handed over a slip of paper. "I see that you also filled out a request with UNICEF, asking for the right to become this boy's legal guardian," the doctor continued. "I'm afraid there's no point in you doing that." At once, Cassandra, Emmanuel, and several other members of the rescue team reacted angrily. "Hold on," Emmanuel protested. "Inez is competent. So many of us can vouch for her." "Nessie's already a good sister," Cassandra added. "She can be a mom too." "Any Mycor droid can give Espinosa a caregiver evaluation," Setla chimed in. "She will be deemed fit for child rearing, I assure you." The doctor raised his hand for silence. Then he pointed at the family tree printout. "Isaac's biological mother was Akira Robinson," he said. "Following her death, we attempted to reach out to all of the young lad's living relatives. As it turns out, Miss Espinosa is his closest living family member, both physically and biologically, as the next closest relative is located in northeast Palestine. Under UN law, she does not need to file for guardianship. She gains protective custody of the child immediately. Dr. Belgreen, please return Isaac to his sister now." Inez reached out to take Isaac from the doctors, dropping the family tree document. Cassandra scooped it up to see the truth for herself. Isaac Freeman, born January 20, 2086, Berlin, Germany. Mother, Akira Jacqueline Robinson. Father, Rafi Marwan Bakir. "So you're half-siblings then," Emmanuel mused. "Over 20 years apart. What a household this is going to be." The group celebrated. Isaac looked around and laughed at the people making noise around him. Seeing a baby giggle served only to lift everyone's spirits a little more. Quarter came around and tried to nuzzle Isaac with her furry snout. The baby wriggled about and seemed to just lose himself in joy. Inez, Cassandra, and Emmanuel felt their hearts grow light for the first time in days. But this feeling was not to last. A shadow fell over the group. Isaac looked up and spotted the cause, pointing with his whole hand at the sky. Conti Divakar was flying overhead. The old Vanian sailed through the sky in silence. Her magnificent white feathers made her seem as fluffy as a cloud. Peering down, the old Stormbreaker spotted her comrades, folded her wings, and dove. "Divakar!" Nainu greeted her warmly as she landed on the beach. "I saw you on Zenonian News last night. Are you really going to be Galactic Custodian?" Conti shrugged off the comment and called for the group's attention. Inez looked at the old bird and saw Conti's beady red eyes were welled up with tears. The kind of dark atmosphere that follows bad news slowly seeped across the ground and brought silence to the rescuers. "Everyone," Conti said. She took a deep breath. It's time. We found Jericho." December 31st, 2086. Port Canaveral, Florida. That night, after the sun went down, there were 2 gatherings on the beach at Port Canaveral. Hundreds of humans, aliens, and hybrids gathered around a massive structure made of timber, watching and cheering as someone shot fireworks into the sky. Blue, green, and red colors exploded into the sky over Port Canaveral while those below cheered. Rescuers, Stormbreakers, GDF soldiers, Americans, and friendly UN forces raised their drinks and toasted to the final victory together. Meanwhile, at the northernmost end of the beach, a smaller and more solemn gathering was taking place. All surviving members of the Robinson family, plus a small entourage, were gathered on the shore near the jetty, a large, man-made pile of boulders that extended roughly 600 feet into the ocean. Blake, Chihiro, Himawari, and Randall were here. Standing beside them were Varian's father, George. Himawari was standing between all three of her surviving children. The oldest, Varian, then his 11-year-old brother, James Padariki, and his 17-year-old brother, Araka Padariki. The two Partogan boys wore green ribbons on their hands in memory of their father, Amako. Standing close to the Robinsons were the four members of the Espinosa family. Inez held Isaac in her arms, feeding the baby from a bottle while Cassandra watched, her eyes wide. Emmanuel held onto Inez's shoulder with his one remaining arm. Inez looked out to sea, her eyes on the far end of the jetty. Lawrence Ridge, Mason Sharp, Maui Ririnui, and Runhan Somtaw moved slowly across the narrow spit of boulders, carrying the body of Akira Robinson between them. They had waited almost a full week to do this, waited for the Emerald Institute to finish their autopsy and genetic testing of the corpse, which proved beyond all shadow of a doubt that the Paradox was truly dead. In the intervening days, Beak of Lavender, Plume of Maroon, and Claws of Honeydew set to work building a pyre. The trio of Saibon flew back and forth from the jetty to the forested swampland that formed Cape Canaveral's southern border. The project took 2.5 days. Navigating the jetty by flashlight, Lawrence found the pyre first. They could have just tossed Akira's remains onto the pyre like a trash bag, but for some reason, Blake, Chihiro, Inez, and Emmanuel had all vetoed the idea. They even stood their ground after others objected. The only one who seemed to understand was Runhan, who came from a society where family ties were viewed as having supreme importance. Enemy or not, the Paradox was their family. She should have that one last modicum of respect, Runhan said. So, the foursome gingerly placed Akira's body onto the pyre, making sure to cross her arms over her chest before departing. Before leaving the jetty, Runhan ran her hand across Akira's face, making sure her eyes were closed. Once everybody was back on shore, Blake spoke these words. It's time to build a new world. A new future without her shadow hanging over us. This is the end, yes. But it's also a beginning. Slowly, Blake nodded at Cassandra. The young girl stepped forward, away from the group. Cassandra stood alone on the shoreline, the ocean water lapping at her bare feet. Cassandra raised both of her hands to her chest, where a green light slowly illuminated near her heart. Cassandra pressed her hand to her heart for a moment, and then pulled it away. A small green flame was siphoned out of her chest and came to rest in her outstretched palm. The green soul fire grew brighter and stronger, until Cassandra was holding onto an emerald fireball. she cocked her hand back and threw the soul fire. The verdant flame sailed through the starry night sky in a high arc before landing atop the funeral pyre. From this distance, it was impossible to see anything aside from the shimmering green fire as it enveloped the pyre. The group stood in silence, watching. Against the inky backdrop, the jade flames looked like a large star on the horizon. Then, after a few minutes, Cassandra lifted her empty hand and then closed her fingers into a fist. At her command, the green soul fire extinguished itself. It was over. Akira Jacqueline Robinson, the paradox, was truly gone. Without speaking a word, the group turned to leave. Cassandra jogged to catch up with Inez. As they moved to join the larger group of people, everyone felt as though they had a spring in their step. The atmosphere became warmer and friendlier. The party was massive. A mix of electric lamps and old-fashioned torches lit the perimeter of the beach and neighboring park with a mystical orange glow. In the center of the space was a second funeral pyre. This one massive, nearly 2 stories tall. Everybody who was someone could be found here tonight. Jay Lansing, his husband, and his son all tackled Inez in a group hug. Sarah Roberts was smitten with Isaac and wanted to hold him. Lawrence Ridge decided to wait before telling Inez he had her guitar case. Bradley Mara pressed a mug of spiced cider into Emmanuel's hand. Quarter, Setla, Maui, Kingi, and Nainu all grabbed Varian and insisted he join them for a drink. Varian agreed, asking if they wouldn't mind calling him by his true name from now on instead. "Victoria, I'm gonna get you so drunk you won't remember your name at all," Quarter declared. Mason Sharp gathered a group of ancient Americans and some Saibon, including Beak of Lavender and Plume of Maroon. Together, they were all singing a tune Ted Navarro made up on the spot. "Time flows ever on, till all is dead and gone. The wind passes by like death's lullaby, but old soldiers never die. Never die, never die. Old soldiers never die. They simply fade away." Runhan sat close to the fire, drinking alone. Naveen Soban joined her, bringing the 4 UN soldiers who defected at the last minute. Sergeant Rella, Shen Kai, Tamin Ashkani, and Dimitro Ryback greeted Runhan in an expectant way, and she perked up, wondering if Naveen had found 4 new crewmates for the Ashoka. Munkustrap, Claws of Honeydew, and Emma von Richthofen met their new boss. Director Varys praised the fighters and said the Emerald Institute had big plans for their careers. Dayun Dazil and Kanti Divakar shared drinks and laughed together, listening to a group of GDF officers explain their plan to install Kanti as the next galactic custodian. Subaki Endo listened with rapt attention as George Farshti told stories about Victoria. Jane Kelly insisted George keep talking and handed him another beer. Chris Wright, Randall Murphy, and Himawari Robinson raised a glass in memory of Sophie, Marcus, and Amako. Further away, just outside the circle, Blake Robinson and Chihiro Tachibana watched the humble victory celebration play out. "You know, there's going to be one hell of a mess to clean up in Berlin when we get back," Chihiro told her husband. "I know," Blake sighed. "All of the military forces in the galaxy are worn down. There's going to be unrest, piracy, new threats we haven't even imagined yet. We don't know what the Batera did to Irabik or the stolen samples of the beast virus. Sooner or later we'll have to confront all of those problems." Chihiro let out a laugh. It was a soft chuckle, very reminiscent of her girlish giggle from almost a century ago. "I was talking about the people of Berlin, partying as though we just liberated Earth," she said. "Do you remember those days, after the last war?" "I do," Blake said, smiling. "Parties all over Earth. Took the British over a year to clean up the mess in Sheffield. Once we get back to Berlin, we need to..." Chihiro grabbed her husband's arm and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Slow down. Let's stay here for a little longer, with our friends, old and new." At that moment, a series of bird calls, high and shrill, caught everyone's attention. Cybon and Vanian soldiers flew over the beach, carrying on their mournful cries. One bird broke from the formation, folded her wings, and disappeared into the darkness. All eyes turned to a dirt path, one that led through the tall grass, connecting the beach to the rest of the city. 4 lumbering shapes could be seen approaching. Shipbreaker Carfu, Setla, Axiom, and Munkustrap entered the beach, carrying a wooden casket between them. Moving slowly, they placed it in front of the massive funeral pyre, just in front of a small niche built into the structure, which was just the right size for a casket. Conti landed atop the pyre with a clatter. While avians circled above, the hundreds of people on the beach started forming into a line. 2 by 2, people filed past the casket. Inez and Cassandra were among the first to view the body within. Jericho was nestled in a bed of white blankets. If her face was not so pale and cold, the old woman could have been fast asleep. "I thought Jericho was the woman who became a god," Cassandra sniffled. "Didn't she come back once already? She can come back again, can't she? She's not really gone, is she?" Inez tried to simply tell the truth, but there was something about this moment that made her pause. The little girl, peering over the casket lid, taking her final glance at the woman who delivered not just humanity, but the galaxy from annihilation. Mourners all around her doing the same. It was a moment that would stay in Cassandra's memory forever. Inez found she just did not have the strength to break Cassandra's heart right here and now. And perhaps Inez held out just a little hope that the answer she gave carried some tiny fragment of truth. "Jericho's not really gone. She left behind all of this," Inez said, gesturing to the beach, to the people, to the sky and stars and moon above. "All of this was her gift to us. Now we have to honor that gift and care for it as best we can. This is how we start our new lives." Inez took Cassandra's hand and gently led her away from the casket. As she rejoined the crowd, Inez spotted Secretary General Robinson. He was watching her in a way that said he overheard the conversation. Finally, once everyone had their chance to see Jericho, it was time to say goodbye. Carfu, Setla, and Corder put their shoulders to the casket and pushed it into the niche at the bottom of the funeral pyre. Standing inside of it, Inez had an even greater appreciation for just how massive the structure was. In those few moments before the fire was lit, Blake leaned over to Inez. "Tell me, what do you plan to do after this? You and your family must be looking to start new lives like everyone else here." "We are," Inez replied. "Dad, Cass, and I just haven't hashed out any details yet. Well, Miss Espinosa, Blake said, my offer still stands. I think you should come to Berlin. I want you to have a place in my government. Inez gasped. You're messing with me, she hissed in a low voice. No way. Are you serious? Does it not seem that way? Blake replied with a mischievous grin that mimicked Chihira's expression. You and I think the same way. Jericho and so many others sacrificed everything to save this world from Akira and give it back to us. We need to cherish and protect both the Earth and the people who live here, regardless of their species. The problem is, I am a very old man, Miss Espinosa, and I've seen what happens when old men like Etienne cling to power long after their day is ended. It is not my duty to preserve the old ways or guard against the inexorable forces that will transfigure and transform the universe around us. My duty is to prepare the next generation for the day when they must take the reins. You, your sister, your brother, my grandchildren, the people you fought alongside today, you are the next generation, the ones who will carry on after my story is over. Blake reached into his coat pocket and produced a small lapel pin. It was the emblem of the United Nations of Earth, set on a blue field. When he turned it over, Inez could see the word diplomat stamped on the back side. When I became Secretary General, Blake said, I struck a deal with the Security Council. They were desperate for me to take the top job and were willing to give me what I asked for. So I asked for the power to appoint my own cabinet without General Assembly approval. They granted me that power for just 1 month. I have only a few scant weeks to build the government I want with no interference. Inez Espinosa, when I look at you and your siblings, I see the future of mankind. Come to Berlin. Help build that future. Inez reached out and then hesitated. She looked over at her family. Cassandra was bouncing up and down on the balls of her feet, silently mouthing the words, "Say yes, say yes!" Cradled safely in Cassandra's arms, the baby Isaac was staring at Inez with his mouth hanging open. In the dim light, his eyes shone deep blue, the exact same color as Inez's eyes. Emmanuel put his hand on his hip and just smiled. Finally, she took the lapel pin and attached it to her blouse. "Welcome aboard, Under Secretary General Espinosa," Blake said. "Nezzy, we're going to start our new lives now?" Cassandra asked. "Yes," Inez replied with a little laugh. "We're finally going to make our own future." Nainu stepped out of the crowd, holding one of the wooden torches used to illuminate the meeting place. He waited until everyone had backed away from the funeral pyre, then tossed the torch into a pile of kindling at the bottom. The 2-story wooden tower quickly erupted into flames. A column of red and orange fire rose up into the air, mesmerizing Cassandra and Isaac. In seconds, it towered high over the beach, burning so brightly that the stars above faded from view, and Inez's shadow was cast out into the ocean, extending hundreds of feet behind her. Inside the burning tower, the casket could no longer be seen. It was lost to the flames. But then, something incredible happened. Starting at the base of the tower, working its way slowly up, the flames began to change color. Orange became blue, red became purple. Inez gasped as she watched an indigo inferno swirl around the funeral pyre. Many of the younger people were confused. They had never seen something like this before. However, The 7 veterans of the War in Heaven knew different. Blake, Chihiro, Tsubaki, Dayunda, Kanti, Axiom, and Jane looked into the blue soul fire and bowed their heads in respect, saying farewell to an old friend. Inez put her arm around Cassandra. Over the noise of the blue fire, she could hear the growing noise in the city of Port Canaveral. Thousands of people were chanting together, counting down from 15. As the seconds ticked away, the soul fire grew brighter and taller, the blue flames reaching dozens of feet into the sky, swirling about like an ethereal tornado. Untold numbers of people on the streets counted down from 5, marking each second until the new year. When the hour struck, a great roar rose up from both the city and the beach. There was cheering, whooping, and celebrating. Fireworks thundered across the sky in colors of blue and yellow. Down below, at the moment of the new year, Jericho's funeral pyre collapsed. The soul fire was extinguished for the final time, and a cascade of blue sparks rose up from the beach. Inez, Cassandra, and Isaac looked up to watch them go. The siblings gazed into the heavenly blue constellation, shimmering and glittering. Isaac felt full of wonder and reached out to grab the stars in his tiny hand. Cassandra felt very small and put her arm around her older sister. Inez felt the warmth of her siblings, the growing love and affection she felt for both of them, the deep loss and sorrow for everyone who could not be here tonight. She also felt, deep beneath it all, a newfound sense of hope for whatever the future would bring. And in that wondrous moment, she found peace.